Hello, everyone. Welcome back from your holiday weekend if you're in the United States. If you were not, then you obviously didn't have a holiday yesterday. Hoping it was a great weekend anyway. I'm glad to have you at today's CUGC user share, and I'm going to get us started with just a couple of quick announcements. First of all, as usual, you will receive a link to today's recording. It's going to come directly from GoToWebinar. You should get it tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. Also, we want you to submit your questions in the chat anytime you have them. We'll try to get to as many as we can today. And finally, at the end, please fill out our short anonymous survey. It's for CUGC use only, and we like to get your feedback. All right, so I'd like to welcome Pat Patterson, the Director of Developer Evangelism at Citrix, to the webinar stage. And I think we would have had Angelo Saraceno, but I think something has come up and he hasn't been able to join us, but no worries, Pat has it completely under control. So I am going to hand things right over to you, Pat. Let me give you the screen and we'll switch to your slides.
Okey-dokes.
And
there we go. Let's show the correct window here. There it is. Okay, and then there, and you should be seeing my slide.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much, Stephanie. And thank you, CUGC, for continuing to host this series of webinars. So I'm Pat Patterson. I'm the Director of Developer Evangelism here at Citrix. I celebrated my first anniversary at Citrix last week, so still a newbie, still learning the Citrix technologies, although I've been working with developer communities for about 15 years now. And I would have been joined by my esteemed colleague, Angelo Saraceno, who is the product manager for everything we're talking about today, but unfortunately, Angelo, at short notice, could not make it this morning. So let's do the best we can without him. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, oops, premature hit already. So we're looking at the CVAD SDK, well, the collection really of CVAD SDKs and APIs. And this question came up in webinar that I did earlier on this year on getting started with the CVAD REST API. And it's a really good question. It's like, why would you use the REST API when the SDK exists? And so in response to that question, and I would thank the viewer, the attendee who asked it, if I could remember who it was, we put this webinar together. So it's important to set some context in talking about the various flavors of Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, CVAD, as we know and love it. So just in terms of, the different deployment options, they kind of run a range from Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops Standard for Azure, a bit of a mouthful. It used to be known as Citrix Managed Desktops. And this is a fully cloud-based solution. So the control plane, if you like, is in the cloud, and you are bringing up your VDAs on Azure, and everything that you do is cloud-based. And you've got some choices there. You can bring your own Azure subscription if you have one, or you can buy everything through Citrix. So you literally have nothing to manage there apart from the capabilities of, apart from bringing up your CVAD desktops. Kind of in the middle here, we have CVAD service. So I often tend to abbreviate that to CVADs, and that's a hybrid model. So here, again, the management plane is in the cloud, so you don't have to set up your own delivery controllers. All of that is managed by Citrix for you, but you can bring your own resource location. And we'll look a little bit closer at the implications of that in a moment or two. And then at the other extreme, you have classic on-premises Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, or CVAD for an abbreviation, formerly known as XenApp and XenDesktop. And here you're really responsible for everything yourself, downloading the binaries, the license keys, and getting to work, deploying those on your machines, on-premise, or in your own segment of public cloud. And so I've kind of laid these out graphically to kind of just emphasize where the responsibilities lie. So with CVAD standard for Azure, as I mentioned here, Citrix is really pretty much doing everything for you. And there's even some default Citrix prepared machine images. And of course, you can bring your own. You can bring your own from scratch, or you can use these as a base to work on. So that's one thing you've got to manage with CVAD standard for Azure. And typically, you have your Active Directory on-premise, and there are various connectivity options to that. To get things started, you can connect to Azure Active Directory, but I don't know of anybody using that in production. Of course, it's an option, but the much more typical scenario tends to be AD on-premises there. So this has its own API, which is essentially a slimmed down version of the API we'll get to in a second. So really just controlling the small amount of functionality you can directly access here. And then here's probably the middle of the curve, I guess, where we're seeing most of the action, I guess, right now is oh, sorry, getting ahead of myself. This is actually, okay, so as I mentioned, like there's two deploy. Okay, let's go back. Okay, fat fingers. There's two deployment options here. Okay, so there's the Citrix managed Azure subscription. So you're buying all of your compute through Citrix. We're managing it for you. These resource locations are being brought up in Azure on your behalf. Now, there's a variant of this that if you have your own Azure subscription that you want to use, then you can supply those credentials, and we will bring up the resource location for you in that subscription. So it's a pretty subtle difference here. Really, we're just moving this box out, and it's really who pays the bill here that changes. So you're kind of responsible for supplying this subscription, but we bring up that resource location, cloud connectors, VDAs, all of that infrastructure on your behalf in your subscription. Now, as I mentioned, the kind of middle of the curve here is CVAD service. So it's been around for a few years now, our original Citrix Cloud CVAD offering. And here there's a pretty clean split between what Citrix Cloud is doing for you and what you're responsible for. And this makes it, I wouldn't say easy, but straightforward, well understood migration from CVAD on premises. So again, here, Citrix Cloud is managing the delivery controllers, your databases, that SQL Server instance, all the monitoring and licensing. And crucially here, there's both an API and an SDK. And as we'll see, the API is very fully featured and pretty much equivalent to the SDK. There's a few corners of difference between the two, but they're broadly comparable. Now, we also provide, the workspace and gateway service, but here you're on your own for supplying the resource location. So again, that might be, on physical machines at your company location. It could be in any of the public clouds, but this is squarely your responsibility. You're installing these VDAs, setting up the cloud connector to point to your CVAD instance over here, and you're responsible for keeping that all up to date and running, as well as you're on your own with your images and again, Active Directory. And then finally, just for completeness, really, on-premises CVAD, and you download the binaries and the licenses, and you have complete control here. And then here we only have the SDK. The REST API is just not applicable to this deployment option. So I drew this nice curve here, this nice graph. This is like the only bit of architecture, I guess, that you'll see here. But what I wanted to illustrate is that, there's a curve here from having CVAD standard for Azure with a Citrix managed Azure subscription. You're getting your desktop as a service. There's no mistake about that. It's not like, you're providing all these services to users. You don't get a huge amount of flexibility, right? There's a trade-off here in that Azure is your only choice of cloud, and we're doing everything for you. And that might be a great thing because your administrative burden is very, very low. Now, up the curve a little bit, might be a bit more flexible, especially in terms of the finances to bring your own Azure subscription. You may have a great deal with Microsoft that gives you very low costs bringing your own subscription. You do have that administration though. It's down to you to make sure that subscription's paid up, and all the other management that goes with it. And then you've got a pretty big jump here to CVAD service. So again, you were getting a huge gain in flexibility. You can put those resource locations where you like, but you do have an administrative cost in setting those up. And it's a big jump in flexibility because here, you can have any cloud you like as long as it's Azure. Here you really can have, your choice of the public clouds, or indeed on-premise resource location. And obviously, everything meets up over here at the right with, vanilla CVAD, where yes, you can have the machine images and locations that you like, but you're on the hook to set everything up. So with that, let's have a look at the different technologies for managing all this stuff, for administering it. Just 1 second. So the CVAD's REST APIs, I did a CUGC webinar, I think it was March. You will definitely find it in the recordings on getting started with Citrix Cloud and the REST API, and I went into CVAD a bit towards the end. So if you're looking for more information on just what an API is and what REST means, please go look at that one. It's a really good explanation that in that webinar, if I say so myself. But the main points here, contrasting it with the CVAD SDK, and I've put the S in brackets there because the SDK really is almost identical between on-premises CVAD and the CVAD service. Here, the transport is JSON over HTTP. So you'll be, managing it from some machine somewhere, from, your choice of programming language, scripting language, and everything is very explicitly JSON traveling over an HTTP connection. So that's great in some ways. Your client can be in pretty much any language or environment. You might have PowerShell on Windows, you could have Python on Linux, you could have, I don't know, Go on Mac OS, whatever you like, because just about anything you can hook up to HTTP these days. It travels through firewalls very easily. With the SDK, you're kind of working with local or a local machine, or you're doing PowerShell remoting, which I believe is on different ports. You might have firewalls to open up there. And the big difference here is that those clients are .NET and Windows only. So, good luck if you are doing some kind of infrastructure as code deployment and you want to make calls from Python. That's not going to be happening with the SDK without, okay, I'm not going to say it's impossible because it's software, but it would be a lot of heavy lifting. Whereas here, I will show you how in a few minutes. Obviously, when you're dealing with cloud systems, your client absolutely needs internet access because Citrix Cloud is sitting out there on the internet. Here, your client must be in the resource location for certain functions. Now, in the docs, it does have more of a blanket statement that the client must be in the resource location. That's not actually always the case, as you'll see. Most management functions will work across the internet. Here, we're talking to the Citrix Cloud API Gateway. That's where these API calls go to. So again, you've got one well-known location to open up the firewall access if you need to. Here, it's a little bit more complex. I believe some of the calls go to Citrix Cloud, but again, if you're wanting to manage the AD integration or so on, then you're going to have to be running in the resource location, I believe, talking to the delivery controller. And then the big difference, the obvious difference at the bottom here, this is a cloud-only solution. So if for whatever reason you cannot be on the cloud, you're working in your users are in defense and you must have an air gap, this isn't going to be working for you. Whereas, with on-premises CVAD and the CVAD SDK, you have flexibility on-prem and cloud. As I mentioned, your resource locations, your resource locations could be on-premise there. Okay, so there are some other APIs in play that you might have heard of. Important to cover these for completeness. So the Quick Deploy API, it's a kind of a mirror of the Quick Deploy user interface in the CVAD Service Studio, or the Web Studio, I think it's called officially. It's a very high-level REST API. Okay, you get a handful of endpoints, and each one of them does quite a lot of work for you in creating the catalogs, master image, and managing applications and so on. So, it's a trade-off there. You get to do less work, but again, it's the trade-off between what you're responsible for doing and the flexibility that you get. And you can only use this with Virtual Apps Essentials and with CVAD Service Quick Deploy mode. So you can go back and forth between this API and that Quick Deploy mode in the Studio, but you can't mix and match with the full Web Studio or the more low-level REST API. And then finally, there's the Monitor Service API. So this is really aimed at monitoring data, analyzing trends, troubleshooting failure, etc., etc. It's built on the OData standard. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it too much. It's an industry standard that many data handling visualization tools readily work with. So you can pull this monitoring data into tools such as Grafana and Tableau and things like that. And if you're familiar with on-premises deployments, you've deployed that SQL Server database, that's basically what it's wrapping here. So we can look at it like this. In terms of functionality, you've got this, all of your day-to-day functions are available in both the REST API and the SDK. That monitoring functionality, again, it's there in the CVAD SDK and in a different form in the Monitoring Service API. And there are a few SDK plugins that are kind of out of scope for CVAD's REST API, or they'll come along in a different form. So in particular, one I'm thinking of here is delegated admin, which is more in the Citrix Cloud side of the fence rather than in the CVAD service. And there's an internal API there that I would expect to be made public down the line. All right, so let's dive in. And one caveat before we get our hands dirty in code is that the CVAD's REST API is still in tech preview. And if Angelo was here, I would nudge him at this point and say, hey, Angelo, what's the latest on this reaching general availability? And he would give me some answer, some vague answer that would be likely later in 2021. But unfortunately, I can't tell you whether it's going to be days, weeks, or months. So watch this space for information there. Watch our Twitter and LinkedIn feeds. Okay, so what I will be doing is, let's just get out of the slides and bring up PowerShell to start with. Okay, so I've got my Windows PowerShell here, and I'm going to go through the same series of operations 3 ways. Okay, once with the PowerShell SDK, and I'm going to use those SDK calls that are very terse and concise. And then once with the REST API from PowerShell. So, you know, if you're familiar with PowerShell, that should be pretty interesting for you. And then once from Python, just to show you, you know, the flexibility you get there to go to a completely different programming language. It's not going to get super complicated. So even if you have no PowerShell experience, but you've done, you know, some administration of CVAD or even CVAD service from the studio, there should be no real surprises here. So I'm in PowerShell. I've already installed the SDK. What I'm going to need to do is to add it as a snap-in. So just tell PowerShell, hey, I've got this thing I installed. And then the first time I use this, I have to set up my credentials. So of course, you know, it's a secure system. I need to have some kind of credentials, username, password, or equivalent to access my CVAD's deployment. So I'm going to supply these here. So I'm going to store these credentials in the default location. They're for the Cloud API. And then I've got this customer ID and client ID. Now, I set those up. If we go to back to the browser here, here I'm in the service. I set those credentials up in Citrix. What always happens, you get everything ready for your webinar, and then the session times out. But luckily, I have credential management here, and I should be able to get in. And oh, the bit that everybody loves. Let's do the number. Okay, so if you can guess my password, and in the next minute, you can totally log in as me with that number. All right, the wheels are back on the bus. Okay, so we clicked into this identity access management area. So here we're in Citrix Cloud proper rather than CVAD service. And if I go into API access there, these are what I'm talking about. These secure clients, I created one, demo client, and it has an ID here, and it also has a secret, which I absolutely cannot retrieve anymore. The only time, this is super important, the only time you can actually get the secret for this client that you create is when you create it. And you have to, I'd advise you to download, you get a CSV file, or copy and paste it into somewhere safe immediately. Because like it says, there is literally no way to get it now. And I'm just going to delete that one because I don't even know what the secret is. So I did that earlier, obviously, some months earlier, and I have that data in PowerShell. I've actually stored it in the Windows environment. So I set those credentials, so they're being stored now. I only have to do this once. So in future PowerShell sessions, this has been stored securely in my local credential store. But I can show you here, I set these as environment variables. And this is just a general good practice. Never have these kind of credentials, identifiers, secrets actually in your code and scripts. One, because it's so easy to send somebody a script, you know, you're helping them out. You might even put it on GitHub with that secret in. And if that leaks, and I've seen this happen, I've seen people ask questions in the discussion forums and paste in this value here that I'm not going to show you. And you're basically letting anybody into your cloud environment with your access. So this is just like a password. Treat it as such, keep it safe, and never share it, never put it in your scripts. These are relatively public, they're not secret, they don't make it any easier for you to access this environment. But I've set up my credentials. So the tasks I'm going to go through are, I'm going to get some information on just the general shape of this deployment of the site. I'm going to list the machine catalogs that are available. So if I go back here, I can go back to my services, virtual apps and desktop. So really here, getting from the API the same kind of information that if you go into the studio, let it do its thing. My home internet is not super slippery. So if I go into full configuration, there's that quick deploy I mentioned earlier. And come on, let's see you. I mean, what this console is actually doing from my browser is making the same API calls that I'm going to make later. But you can see here, I've got a bunch of catalogs here, and it's all a bit of a mess because it's just my demo environment here. But I'm going to do that from here. I'm going to list those out. I'm going to find a catalog based on its name. I'm going to list the machines in that catalog. I'm going to find the machines with no sessions. And finally, I'm going to reboot those just to give you a flavor of some common operations that are not going to take a lot of explanation or time to complete. You know, when you start creating machines and catalogs, that's when we start, you know, hanging around for a minute or two for things to happen. Okay, so let's get the broker site. So what's happening here is the SDK using this information it has up here to make a connection to the cloud and find my CVAD deployment here. We've got information here like the color depth. You know, this is all interesting stuff. You know, the licensing information, the name, cloud XD site, so on and so on, all of the parameters of this site. So that's cool. It's actually a good test to make sure things are working. You can type get broker site, and you know, if anything's off with your authentication up here, this just won't even work. And it's good to have like a test there that you know, narrows any problems down. So first bit of work we're going to do is list those machine catalogs. So we just say catalogs equals get broker catalog. Of course, this is all documented in the CVAD SDK documentation. And these are the kind of operations that are identical, whether you're working on premises or, you know, with CVAD service. You know, any scripts you write are largely applicable across both of them, and you know, until you go into those plugins. And I can see here, I'm not going to list out the catalogs because it's just a whole load of data, but we've got 8 machine catalogs there. And through the magic of PowerShell, one of the really nice things about PowerShell, I've been using PowerShell for about a year now. One of the really nice things is its pipelines. So what I can say is, okay, I want a specific catalog, and it's going to be, I'm going to pipe the list of catalogs that I retrieved already through this where object commandlet. And what that lets me do is filter those results, those 8 results, down to hopefully one whose name is power managed catalog. Okay, so we do that, and that succeeds. And this actually gives us an array. So we can say, okay, let's do catalog.length. We can use autocomplete to complete that, which always seems to take longer than you'd like the first time you use it. It's loading up some cache somewhere, please. Is it? I'm going to type. Oh no, did I even hit tab? Okay, it's a demo, but we can see that we've got a single catalog there as we expected. And in fact, we can, since it's just one catalog, I'll print it out. So we get all of that information. And you'll notice here that this is very concise. I'm getting PowerShell objects directly from this SDK. I'm not parsing anything. All the data is here, ready to access, and I can get into it. I could say, you know, if I wanted to manipulate, I don't know, the provisioning type, I could pull that out very easily. PowerShell's, I don't know, as a developer, I would say Slack, but as a scripter and admin, it's pretty nice that, strictly speaking, catalog is a list of catalogs, but because it's got just the one entry, I can just say catalog, and it gives me that one entry, and it will go into the properties of that one entry without complaining, which is not something that other programming languages do. Okay, so we found a catalog there. You know, it's got the unique ID and you know, its name. You know, by inspection we can see it's the right one. The name matches, of course, and we can list the machines. So again, here it's very, very simple. We can just say, okay, we'll get the machines, and we need to specify the catalog that we're talking about. So again, we're just pulling that UUID property out there. That gets us a list of machines, and again, we can just say $machines.length just to have a little look, just see what we've got. We've got just one. It's my demo system. You would typically have, I don't know, dozens, hundreds, thousands, depending on the size of your deployment. And we can kind of dig a bit deeper. We can say, okay, let's filter on no sessions. So let's copy here. One thing I would say, one thing to note here, when you're working interactively, it's a good idea to get that, you know, save what the SDK gives you into a variable. So we saved it into machines. So we don't have to do the round trip to CVAD service every time. You know, we could just tack pipes onto the end of this thing and, you know, keep calling SDK. But because we saved it in machines, we can just say, okay, send that list of machines through a filter here. So we're saying where the session count property is 0. Okay, we want to see machines with no sessions, and we only want to see the unique ID and the machine name. Okay, we don't want that whole mess of data as a distraction. So we can see here that, you know, the one and only machine there, we can see that it actually does have 0 sessions. We can just double check that. So this is a really nice thing about working interactively here, is that, you know, we can just toss the data around. We can do these ad hoc queries and say, oh yeah, look, the session count is 0. As you know, just double check we got the right machine. We're not going to be trying to reboot the wrong one. And we can see its UID and machine name there. And so finally, you know, as I promised, we're going to reboot the machines with no sessions. So another thing that PowerShell lets us do is, again, build this pipeline out. So again, we're using the list of machines we saved. We're not going to the SDK here. Filtering through, session count is 0. And then we're saying, okay, for each of those things, because we could have more than one in a real deployment, we're going to take this action to restart the machine name we're talking about. So this $_, it's a bit of Python, PowerShell syntax. And so when we're going around a loop like this through a list of objects, This just means the object that we're talking about right now. So the value of this changes on each iteration of the loop. So this just kind of means, okay, this object's machine name. So if we do that, then it does that, it calls that, and it actually shows us what this SDK returns. So in this case, we can see that it's the restart action, and we can see its priority and blah, 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 all a load of other information. And we can actually go across into the logging here and see that. Let's just constrain it to today. You'll see all my practice work earlier on, but yeah, 41 minutes past the hour. So pretty much wherever you are, apart from India, where it's currently 11 minutes past the hour, you can see that this operation was successful, and I enqueued this action of restarting the machine. So presumably that machine is now restarting happily in the background, as it often does as I am practicing these demonstrations. Okay, so we got from, just to reiterate, we can scroll up, we got from adding that Citrix snap-in, we authenticated persistently. Okay, so next time round, we won't need to do that. We will need to do adding the snap-in. We won't need to set these credentials up because they've been stored, store as default. And then we got some information about the site. We got the list of machine catalogs, and we narrowed in on one based on its name, got its machines, and then rebooted all of the machines with a 0 session count. So let's see how to do that with the REST API from PowerShell. And I'm going to go a little bit quicker now because I don't have to explain in detail everything I'm doing. I'm just going to really explain the differences. So first off is authentication. And there's no handy default store here that we can refer back to. You could do that. You're responsible for rolling it yourself. So I'm just going to show you here the basics of authenticating and getting the token back. So here you'll notice we are basically doing the same thing we were doing before under the covers, in that we are presenting a client ID and client secret. We're explicitly handling the token here. Okay, we get some JSON response, and we can actually see that response here. We get very kind of low-level access. We see the HTTP code and the content, and all the headers that came back. But we can easily enough pull that information out by converting it from JSON into this token. So again, we've got a PowerShell object now with this token type and access token. One more thing to show you there is that it does have an expiry. So it expires in an hour. So always bear that in mind. If you're doing anything long-lived, you'll have to periodically get a new token. And then we're actually setting up a pair of headers that we're going to be using in our HTTP calls. So we are specifying that token, and we're also specifying the customer ID. Now, this is one place to say that, emphasize that the REST API is still in tech preview. This mechanism in particular may change. We may move this customer ID into the URL path from being an HTTP header, but you should get plenty of notice of that if it changes in with general availability. So the other thing to notice here, we're using invoke web request. There's a broadly equivalent call called invoke REST method. Largely a matter of taste. I prefer invoke web request because it gives us all of this underlying data. If you use invoke REST method, you get this thing back directly. You don't have to go to the bother of parsing it. Invoke REST method does it for you, but then you don't get this extra information, which may or may not be useful to you for when things go wrong. Okay, we authenticated. Now we can do the equivalent of getting that site information. Not directly equivalent here. We're calling the me API. including those headers, so it knows who we are and which customer we're talking about. And we get a somewhat more terse set of information back. So here we really just get a list of customers with that customer ID there and a list of sites. And this is really important. We need this site ID to be able to make more calls. Where it's kind of implied in the SDK, it's explicitly stated with the API. So again, here, we just pull that out into a variable. So I'm going to say, convert it from JSON into a PowerShell object, and then we go into the 0th element of this customers array and the 0th element of that sites array, and we specifically want the ID. So if we just do this, we can see we have got that site ID successfully. So now we list the catalogs. So again, we'll just paste this in. Right, so we are here, we're calling, whoops. Why did I list all of that out instead of? Okay, here we're calling, we're making calls into the CVAD APIs. And you can see here, this is PowerShell interpolation, I think it's called. We're substituting the value of this site ID variable into the URL. So in reality, this URL is, CVAD API / long identifier / machine catalogs. And this is a very common pattern with REST APIs. There's a URL for every resource, and it uniquely defines the resource we're talking about. And we're just doing an HTTP GET with these headers to pull it back. And here, what I've done is I've sent it into JSON and back, so we can actually see a nicely formatted view of what actually comes back from the API. So all the information on those 8 machine catalogs, excuse me. Sip of the tea my son kindly brought me earlier. And then what I'm doing is, as you see, this is a common pattern in the CVAD's REST API. You get an items element with an array. So we asked for all of the catalogs, they're in this items element. So we can just convert that from JSON again, pull the items out. So we've actually got the array of catalogs now. And this is nice because it lets us just do catalogs.length, and we have 8 of them, and we could iterate through them before to find the catalog we want. So at this point, it's really much equivalent to what we did before, right? We were just using the same line of code, I believe, and we can say catalog.length should be 1. Interesting. Okay. Did I mess something up? It is name, isn't it? So always the good point, good part of the demo here is debugging in real time. No, its name is Power Managed Catalog. So let's see what went wrong. I sent catalogs through where object name equals done. I got that. Okay, seems to have given me the single object for some reason. Not a PowerShell expert, couldn't tell you why, but the important thing is that we can do catalog ID and we get a value. And you'll notice, if you were looking closely, that was called UUID. So, in moving between the SDK and the API, there are a few little subtle differences like this. Okay, so now we can list those machines. So again, we're using the API here, very predictable. This is the common pattern of how REST APIs work. It's why they're so popular and well adopted with services and developers. It's a URL, it's got that site ID. We're delving into the machine catalogs here. So we specify the catalog ID within that, and then we want the list of machines. So, you can see it as diving deeper into a hierarchy of data. So again, we pull out the items from that response, and hopefully we can now do, whoops, machines dot length. Okay, so we know that machines has a length of 1. So with a single machine there, as we expect from earlier, and so, you know, just as before, we can get that machine. So here we've got the ID and name of that machine with a session count of 0. But again, notice UUID changes to ID, and here machine name changes to just name. So just to be aware of if things stop working as you expect. And then we close the loop here with, instead of calling that API call, that SDK call in for each object, we actually make another web request. Now you'll notice this one says post, although there's no payload that we're posting. Usually when you use post, you're actually posting some data. Why is this? Well, it's because we're affecting the state of the system. And one of the things about REST API is that if you do a get, as we did here, okay, the default method is get, you're just getting data, you're not changing state. So even though we don't need to send anything, we're just saying, okay, we're talking about this machine with this ID, and we're doing this reboot action. The dollar means it's an action rather than just you know, a piece of data there. We send post, we use post to signify that, hey, this is going to actually do something. And so by now I can go over here and refresh my log. And for reasons, instead of enqueuing the hosting power action, it just says reboot machine here. So we're doing another one 10 minutes later. Okay, and we're cooking on gas now. So we've seen PowerShell SDK, PowerShell REST API, and now we can see Python. And really what we have now is the exact same pattern with just syntax changes. So a little bit of housekeeping with Python. We're going to be using some modules. So there's not as much built into Python by default as there is in PowerShell. So we have to say we're using request module for HTTP requests, some operating system functionality to get environment variables, and we're using this pretty print to make things look nice on the screen. So here, again, we authenticate. So we do exactly the same post of our credentials here. We get back a token in exactly the same way, and we set up those headers to call the API identically. So really the only thing here is that we don't have a bunch of dollars and curly braces hanging around. So then we could get the site information. So here we're doing this, getting the same data back. So pretty print works slightly different layout to PowerShell JSON, but it's the same information. And the point here is that, you know, we could be doing this from Ansible, which is based on Python, or we could be doing this from, you know, Go with Terraform. You know, the fact that we now have this REST API gives us enormous flexibility in terms of our language and operating system. So I do this from Mac OS all the time using Python. Okay, so we've got that site ID. We can list those catalogs. So I'll just show you. Same deal here, getting the catalog, and there's 8 of them. The only real thing to point out here is that unlike PowerShell, we're actually setting up this session, setting headers in the session, and then we use that session to do all these HTTP requests. So we're not having to tack the headers on each time. They're kind of saved in this session object. So that's pretty nice. You know, it makes the syntax a bit more readable. So we're just saying we're getting the machine catalogs. We've got 8 of them. And then we can find that catalog that matches. So again, here I can say, okay, give me that matching catalog. And if I go up, we've got a single catalog here. One thing to notice, remember I said that PowerShell was pretty convenient, although from a pure programming standpoint, a little bit slack in that it let you treat a one element array as if it were an array. Well, sorry, as if it were just the element. Here we see that in a more traditional programming language like Python, we get back an array. From this, we're saying, okay, look for through the catalogs, and if the element's name is Power Managed Catalog, we're saying give me an array of items that meet this criteria. A very terse Python syntax. Don't worry if it doesn't make complete sense, but this gives you this lets you filter arrays based on some property. But this gives you back an array because there could be more than one that meets that property, in the abstract sense, although we know it's a unique name. So we have to put this 0 on the end just to say to Python, we want the 0th element of that array. So we have got an actual catalog object there, dict, I suppose, to be more precise. Okay, so again, in the last minute or two, we can get the response from listing the machines. And here is where the API takes a moment or two longer to actually complete. And then, okay, did we get an error there? That would be sad. 401. Okay, I'm not going to spend any time debugging this. It's probably something to do with, probably a token expiring because I've been doing this for a while. Let's try this time. Yeah, okay. Just a demo glitch. We'll call that a demo glitch. So we do, in fact, have our list of machines, and here it's len machines, just to see. Okay, it's an array of 1. So again, we can list the machines. Okay, no surprises here. ID and name for those machines with 0 session count. This is called a Python tuple. So it's just 2 bits, 2 pieces of information. And then we can close the loop here with the beautiful, okay, do this post, same URL, do the post for machines where the session count is 0. So this is called list comprehension. Some people would say it's incomprehensible, but this is the Pythonic way of looping through an array, taking some action on each element. Again, it gives me an array of the responses, so I can see it worked. And for proof, we can close the loop and refresh over here, and we should see that 3rd machine reboot right on time now. So we are at half a minute to the hour. So I will take a very quick scan of the questions, and I promise faithfully to answer them offline if I didn't get a chance to answer them here. Will this be exclusively for CVAD service or include on-prem? I think I answered that in those diagrams earlier on. We're talking about the SDK that works with both. We're talking about the API that just works with CVAD service. Thank you, Jermaine, for that question. Chris asks, is the REST API not available for on-premises because it isn't a cloud resource that you have to interact with? Yes, that's precisely correct, because we have an API gateway in Citrix Cloud, and you don't have one on-premises. And there's more questions, but there are a couple of slides I do want to cover before we wrap up and everybody turns into pumpkins. So let's go back here, get this thing out of the way. I promise if I did not answer your question, I will, because that's what I live for in this job, is showing how smart I am. Okay, so we did this, blah, blah, tech preview, reminder. Okay, so the upshot of this is The REST API gives you huge flexibility. Okay, you can manage resources from any programming language. You would be hard pressed to find a programming language that could not call an HTTP endpoint, you name it, APL, Fortran, I'm sure they do. And you can access it from anywhere on the internet by definition. That SDK, you can use it with on-prem and in the cloud. Your scripts can largely be used unchanged. You get convenience. Okay, I was pasting in many fewer lines, probably a third as many lines of code there, because the SDK maps those resources directly into PowerShell object. So your code is less verbose. So the bottom line is the REST API does not replace the SDK. If you like the SDK and you know PowerShell, by all means, carry on using it. But if you have the requirement to integrate with DevOps tools like Ansible or Terraform, this is manna from heaven. This will just work. And the great news is I know that people out there have built HTTP wrappers themselves around the SDK to do exactly that. And you can now ditch them and go through, one fewer layer of code and have less code to maintain yourself. Okay, so resources, copy down these bit.ly links or just Google CVAD's remote SDK. But the remote SDK is documented online. There's actually two sets of documentation. This takes you to the main documentation, which has a link to the developer docs, so this link will tell you how to install it. There's a link there that tells you about all the different commandlets available. And then on the REST API side, the equivalent documentation link that lists out all of the endpoints, all of those paths, and it actually even gives you a way to interactively experiment with them in the developer portal. And I mentioned this tutorial. I also covered it in a previous CUGC webinar. You can go visit go view in the past webinars, but it's there. It walks you through really getting started from the ground up with both CITRIX Cloud and the CVAD API in a bit more detail on those getting started topics. And before Stephanie gets out the shepherd's crook and pulls me off stage, one plug: we have Citrix Developer Forum happening on the 22nd of this month. So these developer forums, I guess they're a little bit like CUGC Excel events, half day of content aimed at a specific region. This one is aimed at the Americas, so we're running it from 1 p.m. Eastern time. 3 live technical breakouts. So Guy Leach will be presenting on Citrix Common Connection Manager SDK, and Remco is helping him set that up. The BrickBridge team will be presenting on their micro app that they started as a hackathon entry and is now in the Citrix Ready Marketplace. And then finally, on the networking side, one of our CTPs, Joe Schonk, is going to be diving deeper into ADC and Ansible. So you might remember he did the CUGC webinar last month with me with a kind of more of an introduction to using Ansible with ADC. We'll have a discussion and a hackathon based on CVAD, so our first CVADs related hackathon. So CDF-AMER-2021, the bit.ly link there. And with that, we are over time, but then we started late. So I claim that as a win, Stephanie.
No problem. I think it was great. Thank you so much for handling all that. And I know you were short your person, and you did wonderfully. Thank you so much.
I will be hunting Angelo down. I'm saying that, and I'm hoping that he has not had a dreadful accident. Angelo, if you listen to the recording and you're recovering from some awful thing, get well soon. But he probably just got called into a customer call. And we do have 3 what are they called? Sets of AirPods that we are giving away to callers. And since we a bit constrained, Stephanie, could you pull those at random, and we'll
Yeah,
follow up with 3 lucky people.
absolutely. Be on the lookout for an email from me. I'll do the Google number randomizer and pick 3 winners and let you know if you're a winner, and I'll get your names over to Pat. And then also be on the lookout for the email with the recording links. And Pat, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and include in that email links to the previous webinars. I did put a link in the chat, but I'll also put it in the follow-up email so you have access to that too.
Wonderful. And if you could drop in these resources, that would be fabulous as well.
Absolutely, I'll do it.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much. For the questions that didn't get answered, I'll get those over to Pat as soon as we wrap up, and he will respond to you with the answers. And other than that, I hope to see you at another CUGC event soon. Hope you all have a great rest of your day and enjoy. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.